The next major incident that is narrated in the Seerah is the first immigration to Abyssinia. The first immigration to Abyssinia. When these tactics of open intimidation, of humiliation, of torture continued, the Prophet ﷺ eventually suggested to the Sahaba that this land has become too constricted for you. Why don't you emigrate? For those of you who want to, why don't you emigrate to the neighboring land of Abyssinia? For there is a Christian king there who is a just king, and he shall allow you to worship without interfering in your worship. And this announcement was made in Rajab, in the 5th year of the da'wah. So, the 3rd year of the da'wah he goes public, less than a year and a half later. So you can imagine now, all of this torture we're talking about is happening in this year and a half. All of this hardship is happening in this year and a half. It gets so difficult in Rajab of the 5th year of the da'wah. This is still 6 BH, 6 before Hijrah. Don't get confused, don't think 5 AH. No, this is 5 after da'wah, which is not anything in our calendar. So we say 6 before Hijrah, because we have, or actually 7 before Hijrah, because the Hijrah is in the 12th/13th year of the da'wah. Right? You guys following this, right? 13 years in Mecca, or to be more precise, 12 years and some months in Mecca. And so this is around 7 BH, you can say, before the Hijrah. So in the 5th year of the da'wah, in the month of Rajab, the Prophet ﷺ allows the Sahaba to emigrate to Abyssinia. Now, for most of us, dare I say all of us in this room, we will not understand what hardships this would mean to emigrate to a new land. Especially us here in America, we are so used to traveling from city to city and place to place. Most of us in this room, most of us have lived in multiple cities in our lives. I myself have lived in 4 or 5 cities for years at times. And it's natural to us because the world has changed immensely from in this time. So we don't understand that uprooting yourself from, even 100 years ago, the bulk of mankind, I think the estimate I read it somewhere was 90-something%. They were born and they lived and they died within 20 miles of the radius of where they were born, of their father's house. This is the bulk of mankind. That's just the way it is. You take over what your father is doing and you live the local land and you go on. And in Jahili Makkah, it was much more worse than this. You couldn't even emigrate to another city because, as we said, the whole concept of tribalism. As a Qurashi, you had to be linked to Mecca. That was your only way of survival. If you went to even Ta'if or Medina, the people there are not of your tribe. And you are 2nd, 3rd class. You don't have any izzah. You can be plundered, raped, looted. Anything could happen. Nobody's going to protect you. Because there is no government, there is no law, there is no society, there is no civilization. This is even within Arabia. Imagine going to a foreign land. On top of that, you don't have bank transfers. You're not going to take your wealth and then, wire it to the different land. No. Your property is your property. You can't sell it at market price because you're not telling anybody you're leaving. People are just going to take over it. When they performed the actual hijrah to Medina, the Sahaba suffered a huge financial loss. Even Sahaba who were rich became poor in the migration because they couldn't take their money with them. It's too dangerous to carry your gold and silver with you. You cannot just carry it in an unarmed guard fleeing for your life and property from Mecca. And so when you're making hijrah, what you're doing is you are entering into a strange world where you don't have honor, you don't have protection, you don't have a passport basically. And you are at the mercy of those around you. To make matters worse, they have been told to go to a land where you're not even speaking Arabic, where the people are not Arabs. It's a different culture. It's a land in Africa, in modern day Abyssinia, Habasha, where the culture, the people, everything is different. So this underscores how difficult Mecca would have been for them to prefer going to Abyssinia over remaining in Mecca. And therefore, when the Prophet ﷺ gave this command, 15 people immigrated, 11 men and 4 women. 11 men and 4 women. Amongst them, the first to migrate was Uthman ibn Affan. And Uthman ibn Affan was married to, who was he married to? Ruqayyah, the daughter of the Prophet ﷺ. And so the first couple to migrate were the Prophet's own son-in-law and his daughter. And he was followed by Uthman ibn Mad'un, another famous Sahabi. And Abdurrahman ibn Auf, the famous Sahabi whom we're all familiar with. Zubayr ibn al-Awwam, Mus'ab ibn Umair, who was the one who was made shaheed in the battle of Uhud. This is the Mus'ab ibn Umair. Abu Salama and his wife Salama. Right? Abu Salama would be the first Sahabi to die in Abyssinia, and Salama would be left all alone without any support. She's cut off from her relatives in Mecca, and now her husband has died in a strange and foreign land, and she was under a lot of trauma. It was a complete stress for her that she is literally cut off. And so out of mercy to her, the Prophet ﷺ sent a proposal to Salama. We're going to talk about that later on. So Salama was actually proposed to because her husband had passed away in Abyssinia. And a number of other Sahaba. So there was 11 men and 4 women. Now it is unclear whether they all of them secretly immigrated, or was it known that they would immigrate. Some reports seem to indicate that they left secretly, and they made their way to Jeddah, which is now called Jeddah. They made their way to the modern port of Jeddah, and then from Jeddah they took a ship to Abyssinia. Other reports seem to suggest that the news was spread amongst the Quraysh, and if this is true, then there's nothing strange about that, because imagine, at this point in time, the Quraysh are not expecting them to immigrate, and if the news has spread that they're immigrating, because the Quraysh have not, there's no reason why they would have stopped them at this stage. Later on they will. But if the news was public, it's not impossible. It could also be the case that it was made public. And there is one report in At-Tabarani's Al-Mu'jam, which is one of the books of Hadith, that seems to suggest that the news was made public. And it is an interesting story because it involves Umar ibn al-Khattab, and it shows the side of him that we're going to see later on. And it involves one of the couples emigrating. There was only 4 couples, right? 4 women, so there was only 4 couples, and the rest were all single males, such as Uthman ibn Mad'un is not married at this time. Mus'ab ibn Umair was never married. He died a bachelor. So these were all unmarried men. So there were 4 couples. One of these couples was Amir ibn al-Rabi'ah and his wife Layla. Amir ibn Rabi'ah and his wife Layla. So in this book of Hadith, Mu'jam al-Tabarani, it is narrated that Layla was packing her bags for Abyssinia and loading the camel. So this clearly means that she's doing it in public. Loading the camel and taking whatever she can to the port of Jeddah. And Umar ibn al-Khattab passes by and sees that they're traveling. You don't load a camel, you're packing your bags or putting it. And so he asks, where are you traveling to? I mean, this is not the season of رحلة الشتاء والصيف, or traveling is a big deal for them. It's not like I travel every week somewhere, every 2 weeks. Traveling is a very big deal for them. You know, where are you traveling to? What is this traveling for? And you can imagine she's so irritated and so angry. She's leaving her homeland, and she's packing always makes you irritated anyway, and so she just barks out at him in complete anger. This is all because of you. It's all because of you. And your terrorizing of us and your persecution of us just because we want to worship Allah. Because of your persecution, we have to go somewhere else and find a land where we can worship Allah in. So she basically snapped at him. Instead of getting angry, Umar seemed to, for the first time, she saw in his eyes compassion. And he said to her, has the matter reached that level? Meaning, I never thought it was that bad. We're just torturing Bilal on the streets. I never thought it was that bad. We killed Ammar or Yasir and so I never thought it was that bad. So he's not thinking, he's like, has the matter reached that level? And then he said, may Allah be with you. Makes dua for her. And he walks on his way. So she's completely flabbergasted that she sees a side of Umar that they have never seen before. So when her husband Amir ibn Rabi'ah comes home, she excitedly tells him, guess what happened? Umar ibn al-Khattab came by and he actually had some compassion. Her husband snorted in contempt And he said, do you really think that he's going to be merciful to us and accept Islam? Wallahi, the donkeys of his father's house will embrace Islam before he does. La himaru bayt al-Khattab, right? The donkeys of his father's house will embrace Islam before Umar ibn al-Khattab does, right? Now, subhanallah, what happened? Within 2 years, Umar ibn al-Khattab is a Muslim. And subhanallah, what this shows us really is that Umar ibn al-Khattab, as we all know this, he had an outer hardness, but inside he was a very soft man. He had an outer strictness, sternness, but even in this stage, inside, and the same we see it in his Fatima's incident, right? He raises his hand and he hits his own sister. As soon as she bleeds, what happens? We're going to talk about this next week, I'm jumping the gun. But you understand? You all know the story, right? He has an inner softness in him that we expect from a good person, and especially from one of the best Sahaba. And it also shows that indeed Allah will guide whomever He wills. Yani the Sahaba never expected Umar to be a Muslim. And Amir utters a phrase which he is forgiven for, but he's so, like, you really think this guy's going to embrace Islam? As we say in English, pigs will fly. Hell will freeze over. He just says this phrase like, come on, get real. But Allah knows. So this also shows us that we should never, ever condemn people to hell. We should never, we don't take it's not our job. We leave it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah knows who He will be guided. Allah knows. And so Salama narrated, first person, it's in Bukhari. Salama said, so we began to live in a good land with good neighbors, and we were safe with regards to our religion and did not fear any persecution. Now, number of points here. Notice that the immigrants, all of them, look at the names that I mentioned: Uthman ibn Affan, Uthman ibn Mad'un, Mus'ab ibn Umair, not Zubair, but Abu Salama, Abdurrahman ibn Auf, in fact Zubair ibn Awam, yes, he did migrate. What's common about all of them? They're all Qurashis. They're all Qurashis. They're all high status people, right? Why couldn't the low status immigrate? They were slaves. They were slaves. They what? Yusuf Ali?
He's quoting from the Quran.
Okay. Alhamdulillah. Why were all of these from the noblemen of the Quraysh? Because the slaves didn't have the political luxury to emigrate, right? And this really shows us an interesting point. SubhanAllah, if you think about it, the people who needed to immigrate the most couldn't do so. Bilal could not immigrate. Ammar could not immigrate. Ibn Mas'ud could not immigrate. Khabbab could not immigrate, right? And the ones who were the most elite, Uthman ibn Affan, he was the one they sent in Hudaybiyah because they know the Quraysh loved him so much they wouldn't dare hurt him, right? Remember Hudaybiyah 10 years later? This is Uthman. They know that he is the most noble amongst them. Even Umar says, Ya Rasulullah, you know me, Uthman has a better position with them, right? So the elite of the Quraysh who are Muslim immigrate. And this shows us that, subhanAllah, the fact of the matter is that a person does have to take care of himself. And if these people, even though they're not as persecuted as the rest, but they have an opportunity to have less persecution, they should avail themselves to the opportunity, right? There's no point in them remaining and being persecuted just because there are other people who are being persecuted worse than them. You guys following this point here? There's an element of Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu alaykum anfusakum, take care of yourselves. And there's nothing un-Islamic about that. That our Prophet ﷺ is telling those who have the political capability, go ahead and immigrate, right? Even though there were people who needed to immigrate worse than them. But what are you going to do? So you make the best of a bad situation. And this is, in Arabic, there's a qa'ida, a maxim, I'm always scared using the word qa'idah because, Allah say, qa'idah of course means a legal maxim, a rule, right? And that's why those guys called it al-qa'idah, because it's the base, right? But we use the word qa'idah all the time. The funny joke is that when you teach the kids the Quran, what is the book that they use? Huh? It's like, so there's a joke that if somebody sent an email that I need to teach my kid the qa'idah, right? And so it was intercepted by the FBI and it caused a huge issue. It's like, you're going to teach your kids qa'idah? It's like, no, the Nurani qa'idah is the, alif bata. We're teaching them the alphabet. So the point being that there's a maxim in fiqh that says that you basically have to choose akhaffu dararain, or the lesser of the two evils. You always have to go with the lesser of the two evils. You can't save everybody. You can't. Does that mean that all of them suffer? No. Well, those who can go. Let them go. And let them have a better life over there. This also shows, and this is a very important point, this also shows that not all of the lands of the non-Muslims are the same. Some of the lands of the non-Muslims are peaceful. You can live there and worship Allah. And others are hostile. Mecca and Abyssinia were not the same lands. Abyssinia was a land they could emigrate to and live in peacefully. Mecca was not. And this is a very important point that we especially need to extrapolate from in our times. That not all of the lands are the same. There are lands where freedoms are guaranteed. And there are lands where people are persecuted. And so in our religion, we have the clear-cut political notion that there are certain lands you are allowed to live in and you should live in. What is the condition? You have the freedom to worship Allah there. And if we have that freedom, then we remain law-abiding citizens of that land. And this is, I have talked about this in many lectures. The model of the Abyssinian Muslims is a model that we here in America can benefit from. I'm not saying it's exactly the same. There's nothing, no two things are exactly the same. But I'm saying overall there is a model. And that model is what? You live as a minority in a majority non-Muslim land, and you obey the laws of the land, and you understand that you are citizens, you are under the government of that land. And you don't intend to overthrow the constitution of the government. The Muslims of Abyssinia were not plotting and planning to overthrow the Najashi, were they? Right? And they were not even allowed to do this. They were entering on a visa, basically the equivalent of a visa, and that visa allowed them to live and worship and participate in the community without any problems. And therefore this is a model that we here in America can basically emulate. A lot of the extremists are on the vibe of basically you cannot live in America. It is haram to live in America. That is their opinion. In response, we say the Muslims were living in Abyssinia, and their goal in Abyssinia was nothing other than the freedom to worship Allah, correct? Right? They had no political ambitions, none. And they remained there for more than a decade. And this is interesting. The Muslims in Abyssinia, way after Medina was founded. In fact, not just more than a decade, they remained there for 14 years. For 14 years. 7 years after the Hijrah, the Muslims were still in Abyssinia. It was only after the Battle of Khaybar that the Prophet ﷺ sent them a letter to Ja'far. Ja'far did not participate in Badr and Uhud. Why? Because he wasn't there. Ja'far was in Abyssinia, taking care of the Muslims over there. Only after the Battle of Khaybar, and that's in the 7th year of the Hijrah, did the Prophet ﷺ send them a letter and tell them to come back. And this shows that there was a community of believers even when there was a Darul Islam in Medina. There was a community of believers living in Abyssinia, even when there is a fully functioning Darul Islam. How about when there is no Darul Islam in our time, and there is no Khilafah in our times? How can it possibly be wrong to live in a land where we have the freedom to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in?